A martial arts black belt breaks a teenager's arm during a community center demonstration. But this isn't an accident. It's deliberate punishment for the kid's defiance. The sensei stands over his victim with satisfaction as the 17-year-old screams in agony, his bones shattered beyond repair. But the quiet man rising from the back of the crowd isn't just another concerned parent. This is Mike Tyson himself. The black belt has no idea he just tortured a child in front of the most feared heavyweight champion in boxing history. While the instructor tries to spin his assault as a training accident, the legendary fighter approaches with the calm of a man who's destroyed bigger bullies than this. The teenager's sister watches in terror as her brother writhes in pain, but now she sees hope in the eyes of a true champion. The sensei's students back away, suddenly realizing their master picked the wrong kid to brutalize at the wrong demonstration. What happens when a fake tough guy faces real power? Can the black belt survive learning why legends never back down from bullies? What happened next would terrorize the instructor for the rest of his pathetic existence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Saturday afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Roosevelt Community Center gym, warming the folding chairs. Arranged in neat rows facing a makeshift demonstration area covered with blue wrestling mats. Colorful banners hung from the basketball hoops reading, "Annual Fundraiser, Save Our Youth Programs," in bold red letters. Rita Fleming stood at the front of the room, her graying hair pulled back in a practical bun, surveying the crowd of over 75 community members who had answered her call. Parents sat with their children, elderly neighbors chatted quietly, and teenagers lounged in the back rows with the studied indifference that couldn't quite hide their curiosity. "Friends, neighbors, thank you all for coming today," Rita began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 30 years managing classrooms before taking over the community center. "Without $50,000 by the end of this month, we'll have to cut our youth programs entirely. But today isn't about problems, it's about solutions." She gestured toward the demonstration area with obvious pride. "Our main attraction comes from the East Side Fighting Academy. Sensei Derek Walsh has graciously volunteered to show us what real martial arts training can do for our young people." As if summoned by her words, the gymnasium's side door opened and Derek Walsh strode in, his expensive white GI crisp and perfectly fitted to his muscular 6-foot frame. Behind him followed 6 students in matching uniforms, their movements synchronized and disciplined. Walsh's dark hair was perfectly styled, his posture commanding attention from every person in the room. That I in the back row, almost unnoticed among the crowd, sat a stocky older black man in a simple gray sweatshirt and worn jeans. His distinctive facial tattoos might have drawn stares in another setting, but here he blended into the diverse community gathering. He checked his phone occasionally, but kept his attention focused forward, watching everything with quiet intensity. Near the middle of the room, 17-year-old Bobby Martinez shifted in his metal folding chair, automatically positioning himself to partially shield his 12-year-old sister Carmen from the crowd's view. His calloused hands and the premature lines around his tired eyes spoke of someone who had grown up too fast, working construction to help support their family since their father had walked out 3 years ago. Carmen leaned against her brother's shoulder, her dark eyes taking in everything around them. Despite wearing a carefully maintained hand-me-down dress, she carried herself with quiet dignity. "The teacher seems fancy," she whispered to Bobby. Walsh reached the center of the demonstration area and turned to face the crowd, his smile practiced and confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, children, thank you for this opportunity. What you're going to see today isn't Hollywood nonsense or tournament sport fighting. This is real martial arts, the way it was meant to be taught." His eyes swept across the assembled faces with predatory calculation, lingering on the teenagers and younger children. "I'll need volunteers later, so I hope some of you have the courage to experience authentic combat training." Bobby felt something cold settle in his stomach at those words. He pulled Carmen a little closer, his protective instincts sharpening. In the back row, the quiet observer in the gray sweatshirt leaned forward slightly, his full attention now locked on the man in the expensive uniform. Walsh began with a series of traditional forms, his movements sharp and technically perfect. The crowd applauded politely as he demonstrated complex combinations of strikes, blocks, and kicks that flowed together like a deadly dance. His students followed along, their synchronized movements impressive even to untrained eyes. Martial arts isn't just about fighting, Walsh explained between demonstrations, his voice carrying easily through the gymnasium. It's about discipline, respect, and understanding your place in the natural order. He gestured for one of his students to step forward, a well-dressed 14-year-old named Kevin whose parents sat beaming in the front row. Kevin here has been training with us for 6 months. Notice how he responds to instruction. Walsh positioned the boy in a basic defensive stance, then began demonstrating joint locks and pressure points. But his grip lingered several seconds longer than necessary, his pressure just beyond the threshold of discomfort. Kevin's face tightened with pain, but he didn't complain or pull away. Walsh's smile widened slightly at the boy's silent endurance. Excellent control, Kevin. True martial artists learn to accept necessary discomfort for the sake of improvement. Rita shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Something about Walsh's methods felt wrong, though she couldn't put her finger on exactly what. The way he seemed to enjoy the boy's obvious pain struck her as more sadistic than educational. Bobby watched the demonstration with growing unease. He had been in enough fights to recognize the difference between teaching and dominating. Walsh wasn't showing technique, he was showing power. The way the instructor's eyes lit up when Kevin winced reminded Bobby of his father during his worst drinking days. That doesn't look right, Carmen whispered, her small hand finding Bobby's in the back row. The mysterious observer sat perfectly still, his massive hands slowly clenching into fists though his expression remained neutral. His breathing had changed, becoming deeper and more controlled, like an athlete preparing for competition. Walsh moved on to more advanced demonstrations, calling forward another student for what he termed realistic self-defense scenarios. This time he applied a chokehold, maintaining it several seconds past any instructional purpose while explaining the technique to the increasingly uncomfortable audience. Real confrontations don't stop because someone taps out, Walsh said, finally releasing the gasping teenager. On the street, mercy is a luxury you can't afford. Several parents began gathering their belongings, clearly disturbed by what they were witnessing. But Walsh seemed energized by their discomfort, his voice growing stronger and more aggressive. Now then, he announced, scanning the crowd with predatory interest, let's move beyond basic demonstrations. I need a volunteer with some spirit, someone who thinks they're tough enough to experience advanced combat techniques. His gaze swept across the rows of faces, lingering on the teenagers with obvious calculation. Surely someone here has the courage to step forward and learn what real strength feels like. Bobby felt the challenge in those words like a physical blow. This wasn't about teaching anymore. This was about finding a victim. Walsh repeated his call for volunteers, but his tone had shifted from invitation to provocation. Come now, surely someone here has the backbone to experience authentic martial arts. Or are we all content to just watch from the safety of our chairs? The gymnasium had grown uncomfortably quiet. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer, sensing that something had gone very wrong with what was supposed to be an educational demonstration. Walsh's eyes settled on 13-year-old Marcus, a small boy with thick glasses whose mother sat nervously in the third row. You there, young man. You look like you could use some confidence. Step forward. Marcus shook his head quickly, but Walsh's smile had taken on a cruel edge. I insist. Mrs. Patterson, surely you want your son to learn how to stand up for himself? The public pressure worked. Marcus's mother nodded reluctantly, and the terrified boy shuffled toward the demonstration area on unsteady legs. Walsh positioned him for what he claimed would be a gentle introduction to leverage principles. But there was nothing gentle about the wrist control technique Walsh applied. Marcus cried out in genuine pain and fear as the instructor's grip tightened beyond any reasonable demonstration. His mother started to rise from her chair, but Walsh dismissed her concerns with a condescending wave. Marcus is learning important lessons about real confrontation, aren't you, son? Walsh's voice carried false concern while his grip remained punishing. Sometimes growth requires a little discomfort. Bobby saw the terror in Marcus's eyes, the same helpless fear he remembered from his own childhood when his father's temper would explode without warning. The same fear he sometimes glimpsed in Carmen's eyes when their situation seemed hopeless. Without thinking, Bobby pushed himself to his feet. Hey, maybe pick on someone your own size. The words cut through the gymnasium's tense silence like a knife. Every head turned toward this teenage construction worker challenging a black belt instructor. Walsh's eyes lit up with genuine pleasure. This was exactly what he had been fishing for. Carmen grabbed for her brother's hand. Bobby, don't, she whispered. But he was already committed to I in the back row. The man in the gray sweatshirt slowly removed his phone from his pocket, though not to record the confrontation. His body language shifted subtly from relaxed observation to coiled alertness, like a predator recognizing potential danger to something under his protection. Walsh released Marcus, who scurried back to his mother with tears streaming down his face. The instructor turned his full attention to Bobby with a cold, satisfied smile that chilled everyone who saw it. Well, a hero. Walsh's voice dripped with mock admiration. How refreshing. Please, young man, come forward and show us what you've learned on the streets. I'm sure we can all benefit from your expertise. Bobby walked toward the demonstration area with steady steps, ignoring Carmen's whispered pleas to sit back down. He had made his choice the moment he saw genuine fear in another kid's eyes. Some lines couldn't be crossed without consequences. The quiet observer in the back row leaned forward, his attention now completely focused on what was about to unfold. Bobby stepped onto the blue mats, and immediately the size difference became apparent. At 17, he was lean and strong from construction work, but Walsh's professional build and 6-inch height advantage made him look like a child facing an adult. The instructor circled him slowly, a predator savoring the moment before the kill. Look at this, everyone, Walsh announced to the increasingly uncomfortable crowd. A perfect example of untrained street arrogance meeting disciplined martial arts. This young man thinks his manual labor makes him tough enough to challenge someone with real skills. Rita Fleming rose from her chair, her maternal instincts screaming. Warnings. This had stopped being a demonstration and become something far more dangerous. But she didn't know how to intervene without making things worse for Bobby. Walsh began with seemingly harmless positioning exercises, having Bobby hold various stances while he explained different techniques to the audience. But each position became a subtle form of torture, with Walsh applying joint pressure just beyond the point of comfort, testing exactly how much pain the teenager would endure before breaking. Bobby gritted his teeth, refusing to show weakness. His construction work had taught him to push through discomfort, and his pride wouldn't let him surrender in front of his sister and the community. But Walsh's grip was growing tighter, the pressure more intense. Notice how he resists proper instruction, Walsh commented to the audience, his voice clinical while his hands inflicted increasing pain. This is exactly why street fighters always lose to trained professionals. They don't know when to accept their limitations. Parents in the crowd began gathering their belongings, clearly disturbed by what they were witnessing. Some headed toward the exits with their children, but many remained frozen, unsure whether to intervene or flee. Walsh announced his next demonstration would be an advanced restraint technique used by law enforcement. He maneuvered Bobby into what appeared to be a standard control hold, but then began applying pressure that had nothing to do with teaching and everything to do with dominance. Bobby's face showed the strain, but his voice remained steady. Don't tap out to bullies. The words hit Walsh like a slap. His friendly instructor mask finally dropped completely, revealing the cruel sadist underneath. Wrong answer, boy. Time to learn some respect. In the back of the gymnasium, the stocky man in the gray sweatshirt rose slowly to his feet. His movement was deliberate and controlled, but something about it made several nearby spectators glance in his direction. There was something familiar about his face, something that tugged at memory. Walsh positioned Bobby's arm in a complex manipulation that was clearly designed to cause serious injury rather than demonstrate technique. Let's see how tough you really are, he hissed, beginning to apply leverage that would snap bone if taken to completion. Bobby's scream of pain and defiance echoed through the gymnasium as Walsh's true nature revealed itself to everyone present. Walsh had Bobby trapped in an arm control position that was rapidly escalating beyond demonstration into outright assault. Rita Fleming rushed toward the mat shouting, "Stop this right now." But the instructor ignored her completely, focused entirely on punishing the teenager who had dared to challenge his authority. The crowd's murmur turned to alarmed voices as Walsh's grip tightened with surgical precision. This wasn't martial arts instruction. This was revenge delivered through technical expertise. Bobby's face had gone gray with pain, but he still refused to submit. Last chance to learn some manners. Walsh hissed through clenched teeth. The sickening crack of bone echoed through the gymnasium like a gunshot. Bobby's scream of agony silenced every voice in the building as he collapsed to the mats, his left arm twisted at an unnatural angle below the elbow. Carmen ran toward her brother as Walsh stood over his victim with obvious satisfaction. Sometimes, lessons require permanent reminders, he announced to the horrified crowd. This was an unfortunate accident caused by his resistance to proper instruction. Parents grabbed their children, heading for the exits in panic. Rita knelt beside Bobby, whose face had gone chalk white as shock set in. His arm hung useless, the break clearly visible through his thin shirt sleeve. Walsh began spinning his narrative. Immediately, this is exactly why proper training is essential. Street toughness means nothing against discipline technique. His injury is the result of his own stubborn. That's enough. The voice came from the back of the rapidly emptying gymnasium, deep and unmistakable in its authority. Every person in the building turned toward the sound. The man in the gray sweatshirt walked steadily down the aisle between chairs, his presence somehow changing the entire atmosphere of the room. As he stepped into better lighting, recognition rippled through the crowd like a wave. The distinctive facial tattoos, the powerful build, the way he moved with controlled violence barely held in check. Whispered voices began identifying him. Is that? Oh my God, that's Mike Tyson. The former heavyweight champion of the world reached the demonstration area, and suddenly Walsh looked very small, despite his size advantage over Bobby. Tyson knelt beside the injured teenager, his massive hands gentle as he examined the broken arm without moving it. "Easy, son. Help's coming," he said quietly, his voice carrying decades of experience with real violence. He looked up at Carmen, who stood frozen with tears streaming down her face. "What's your brother's name?" "Bobby," she whispered. "Bobby's going to be fine," Tyson assured her, then looked directly at Walsh with eyes that had stared down heavyweight champions. "But you and I need to have a conversation." Mike Tyson pulled out his phone and dialed 911 personally, staying on the line to ensure rapid response. He kept Bobby conscious and calm with quiet conversation, sharing brief stories about his own injuries from decades of professional fighting. "Broken bones heal stronger," he told Bobby, whose breathing was becoming more steady. "But this wasn't your fault, son. Remember that." Meanwhile, Walsh attempted to maintain control of the deteriorating situation. He gathered his students together and began packing equipment with obvious haste, telling them to load everything into their van immediately. The demonstration got out of hand due to an untrained participant. Walsh announced loudly to the remaining spectators, "These things happen when people don't follow proper protocols." Tyson slowly stood to his full height, the difference in their builds becoming apparent to everyone watching. Walsh was tall and muscular, but Tyson possessed the kind of physical presence that came from a lifetime of combat at the highest level. "I know exactly what this was," Tyson said quietly. "And you know who I am." Walsh attempted false bravado, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "I don't know who you think you are, old man. But this was a legitimate martial arts demonstration. The kid got hurt because he didn't know when to quit." The gymnasium had grown deadly quiet. Even Walsh's students had stopped packing, sensing that their instructor was about to face something far beyond his experience. Rita Fleming, emboldened by Tyson's presence, began taking photos of Bobby's injury and getting contact information from witnesses. "I should have trusted my instincts about you," she told Walsh. "I saw how much you enjoyed hurting that first boy." Paramedics arrived within minutes, their professional assessment confirming what everyone could see. Bobby's break was severe and would require immediate surgery. As they prepared to transport him to Detroit General Hospital, Bobby grabbed Tyson's hand with his good arm. "My sister," he whispered. She'll be safe," Tyson promised, looking at Carmen with the same protective expression he'd shown Bobby. "You have my word." As the ambulance pulled away, Tyson noticed Walsh's students loading equipment with unusual efficiency, as if they were accustomed to quick exits. One of them dropped a folder, and papers scattered across the parking lot. Walsh screamed at the boy to collect everything, but his panic was obvious. Rita approached Tyson as the crowd finally began to disperse. "Mr. Tyson, I can't thank you enough for what you did, but I'm afraid this might not be over." Tyson watched Walsh's van speed away, his expression thoughtful. "No, it's not over. Men like that don't stop until someone makes them stop." Carmen took Tyson's massive hand in her small one. "Will Bobby really be okay?" "He'll be more than okay," Tyson assured her. "He's got the heart of a champion. And champions always find a way to win." Detroit General Hospital's emergency room buzzed with typical Saturday evening activity. Tyson sat in the waiting area with Carmen, having followed the ambulance after Rita insisted on driving them. He'd bought her food from the vending machine and was quietly talking with her about Bobby's courage while they waited for news from the operating room. "My brother always protects people," Carmen said, her voice small but proud, "even when he shouldn't." Rita arrived after closing the community center early, her face showing the stress of the afternoon's events. She sat beside them, her maternal instincts extending naturally to this frightened little girl whose brother was fighting for his future in surgery. "Tell me about your family," Tyson said gently to Carmen. The story emerged slowly. Their father had walked out 3 years ago, unable to handle the pressure of supporting his family. Their mother worked double shifts as a nurse at a different hospital across town. Bobby had dropped out of school at 16 to work construction, determined to keep their small family together. "He was going to go back and get his diploma," Carmen explained. "He promised me he'd graduate and maybe go to college. But now, he still will," Tyson said firmly. "This doesn't change who your brother is." Rita shared her growing concerns about Walsh during the long wait. Several promising young athletes from the community had disappeared after showing interest in his advanced training program. Parents would call asking about their children, only to be told the kids were participating in intensive training that required complete focus. "I always felt something was wrong, but I couldn't prove anything," Rita admitted. These were good kids from struggling families, the kind who might be tempted by promises of money and professional training. Dr. Patricia Reeves, an orthopedic surgeon, emerged from the operating theater after 3 hours. The surgery had been successful, but Bobby's recovery would take months and require extensive physical therapy. The fracture pattern was complex and clearly intentional. "This wasn't an accident," Dr. Reeves said bluntly. "Someone with considerable knowledge of anatomy caused this injury deliberately. Do you want to file a police report?" When Bobby woke up from surgery, the pain medication made him drowsy but talkative. Rita and Tyson gathered close to his hospital bed as he shared crucial information about Walsh's operation. "He's been recruiting kids from all the poor neighborhoods," Bobby explained, his words slightly slurred. "Promises them money and real training. But something felt wrong about it from the start." Bobby described how Walsh would identify promising young fighters and invite them to advanced sessions away from the regular classes. Kids who accepted would change, becoming secretive and withdrawn from their families. "Some just disappear completely," Bobby continued. "Parents think their kids are training hard and will come home eventually. But they don't." As visiting hours ended, Tyson promised Bobby and Carmen he would investigate Walsh's operation thoroughly. Walking to the parking garage with Rita, she revealed information that made the situation personal. "Mike, there's something else you need to know," she said, pulling out a folder of registration forms. A 16-year-old named Jimmy Kirkland joined Walsh's advanced program 3 weeks ago. "I tried to call his guardian today to check on him." She handed him a form with a photo of a young man whose facial features clearly showed family resemblance to Tyson. The guardian listed was Mike Tyson himself. "Jimmy's my nephew," Tyson said quietly, his world suddenly tilting off its axis. Tyson stopped dead in the hospital parking garage, Rita's words hitting him like a physical blow. Jimmy was his brother Dennis's son, a kid Tyson had been trying to connect with since getting out of prison, but who had been increasingly drawn to street life despite his uncle's efforts to guide him toward better choices. His hands shook as he immediately dialed Jimmy's cell phone. Straight to voicemail. The cheerful recorded message felt like mockery now that he knew where his nephew had been for the past 3 weeks. Tyson called his brother next, waking Dennis from what sounded like a drunken stupor. "Dennis, when's the last time you saw Jimmy?" "I don't know, Mike. Maybe a week ago? Kid's been staying with different friends lately." Figured he was embarrassed to ask for help again. Dennis's voice carried the familiar slur that had defined their family dysfunction for decades. What friends? What help? Dennis revealed that Jimmy had been struggling with anger issues at school, getting into fights, and facing suspension. Some martial arts teachers said he could help channel Jimmy's aggression. Kid was excited about it for the first time in months. Tyson closed his eyes, seeing the trap his nephew had walked into. A troubled teenager from a broken home, looking for guidance and belonging. Exactly what Walsh specialized in exploiting. Within an hour, Tyson and Rita were parked outside Walsh's East Side Fighting Academy. The building was completely dark, but they could see through the windows that the space had been hastily cleared out. Only empty mats and broken equipment remained scattered across the floor. An elderly neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Watson, approached their car with obvious agitation. "You folks looking for that martial arts man? He cleared out this evening. Had trucks loading equipment like they were running from something." She explained that she'd seen similar hasty evacuations before. "That man moves his operation around. Every few months. Always in the middle of the night. Always like he's being chased." Rita suggested checking the dumpster behind the building, and their search proved fruitful. Walsh's crew had missed several important documents in their rush to escape. Registration forms with names and addresses of dozens of kids, financial records showing payments from something called Underground Combat Promotions, and most disturbing, medical waivers signed by minors without parental consent. Back at Tyson's modest house near downtown Detroit, they spread the recovered documents across his kitchen table. The picture emerging was far worse than either had imagined. This wasn't just an aggressive martial arts instructor. This was an organized operation recruiting vulnerable children for something much more sinister. Tyson stared at Jimmy's registration form, which included a recent photo showing his nephew's eager, trusting face. At 16, Jimmy looked like Tyson had at that age, all potential and no real guidance, hungry for someone to believe in him. "I failed him," Tyson said quietly, "just like I failed so many others." Rita placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Not this time, Mike. This time we stop it before it's too late." Tyson looked up at her with eyes that had seen both the heights of success and the depths of personal failure. "Then we better move fast. Because if I know anything about predators, it's that they don't give up their prey without a fight." Dawn broke gray and cold over Detroit as Tyson worked his heavy bag in his home gym, each punch precise and controlled. The rhythm helped him think, channeling his rage into something useful. Rita arrived with coffee and the beginning of a plan. "I contacted Detective Frank Romano," she said, settling into a folding chair beside the speed bag. "He's a 15-year veteran who specializes in youth crimes. Says he'll open an official investigation, but we need more evidence before they can move." Romano had been helpful during their phone conversation, but cautious. Underground fighting rings were notoriously difficult to prosecute because they moved frequently and operated in legal gray areas. He suggested we need someone on the inside. To gather real evidence, Rita continued. Tyson stopped hitting the bag, sweat dripping from his face. "Someone like me. Mike, you can't just walk in there. These people aren't stupid." But Tyson already had an idea forming. His boxing connections ran deep through Detroit's legitimate and underground fighting scenes. He made a call to Mickey Torino, an old promoter who'd handled some of Tyson's early comeback fights after prison. Mickey was reluctant at first. "Mike, you don't want to get mixed up in that world. It's not boxing, it's something uglier." "My nephew is in there, Mickey." That changed everything. Within 2 hours, Mickey had arranged a meeting for that evening. There's talk of rich boy fights where wealthy spectators pay serious money to watch what they call authentic street combat. Not professional boxing, Mike. Desperate kids fighting for survival money. That afternoon, Tyson visited Bobby in the hospital. The teenager's recovery was progressing slowly, but his spirit remained strong. Carmen sat beside his bed, helping him with a crossword puzzle. "Any word about the other kids?" Bobby asked immediately. Tyson shared what they'd learned, watching Bobby's face tighten with anger. "There's a girl named Ashley Patterson. She was at the community center's after-school program, real good athlete. Walsh recruited her about 2 months ago. Nobody's seen her since." Bobby provided more names and details about Walsh's recruitment methods. The instructor targeted kids from single-parent homes, offered them legitimate sounding opportunities, then gradually isolated them from their families. He's real good at finding kids who need to belong somewhere, Bobby explained. Kids who'd do anything for someone who believes in them. That evening, Tyson met Mickey at O'Malley's, a downtown bar frequented by fight promoters and combat sports enthusiasts. The place reeked of stale beer and broken dreams, exactly the kind of environment where desperate people made dangerous deals. Mickey led him to a private booth where a well-dressed man in his 50s waited with patient confidence. Vincent Caruso looked like a successful businessman. Expensive suit, manicured nails, soft hands that had never thrown a punch in anger. Mr. Tyson, Caruso said, extending his hand with a smile that never reached his eyes. I hear you might be interested in some alternative entertainment ventures. Caruso ordered expensive whiskey and began his pitch carefully, like a spider testing the strength of its web. He spoke in euphemisms and implications, testing Tyson's interest in unconventional sporting events that cater to clients with particular tastes. Traditional sports have become too sanitized, Caruso explained, his voice cultured and reasonable. Our clients appreciate more authentic combat experiences, raw talent, genuine hunger, real consequences. Tyson played his role perfectly, the former champion looking for investment opportunities, letting his past legal troubles suggest he might be willing to bend rules for profit. What kind of money are we talking about? Substantial. Winners can earn $5,000 per fight. Losers get their medical expenses covered. Caruso's smile widened. All participants are willing volunteers, of course. Young fighters eager to prove themselves and earn real money. The numbers told Tyson this was a significant operation. $5,000 per fight meant wealthy spectators were paying much more to watch. Sounds interesting, but I want to see the operation before investing. Caruso had been expecting this. Naturally, tomorrow night we have an event. Bring $50,000 cash as a demonstration of serious intent. You'll get it back, plus profit if you decide to join us. After the meeting, Tyson contacted Rita and Romano with the information. Romano provided a wire and outlined the legal requirements for gathering evidence that would hold up in court. You need proof of coercion, proof the fighters are minors, proof of the betting operation, Romano explained during their clandestine meeting in an empty parking garage. Most importantly, don't engage physically unless lives are in immediate danger. If you blow this, they disappear forever. Tyson spent the evening practicing emotional control while wearing the wire. His legendary temper had cost him everything. Once before, he couldn't let it destroy his chance to save Jimmy and the other kids. Late that night, he called Dennis again, hoping for any information about Jimmy's state of mind before joining Walsh's program. His brother was sober this time, and the conversation was more productive. Kid was angry about everything, Dennis admitted. School, home, the neighborhood. Said he was tired of being nobody, wanted to make something of himself. When that martial arts teacher started paying attention to him, Jimmy lit up like I hadn't seen in years. Why didn't you call me? Because you scare him, Mike. Kid thinks you're disappointed in him. Thinks he's just another screw-up from our family. The words hit harder than any punch Tyson had ever taken. Jimmy had been looking for guidance and belonging, and his own uncle's reputation had driven him toward the very predators Tyson was trying to stop. As he lay awake that night, Tyson thought about all the young fighters he'd known who had been exploited by the boxing system. Promising kids turned into commodities, their dreams sold to the highest bidder, their bodies used until they broke that he wouldn't let it happen to another generation. Not on his watch, Saturday evening brought Tyson to the meeting point Caruso had specified, a seemingly abandoned warehouse in Detroit's industrial district. He carried a briefcase containing $50,000 in marked bills provided by Romano's department. The weight of it nothing compared to the tension coiling in his chest. Despite the wire and backup surveillance, Tyson felt the familiar pre-fight alertness as he approached the unknown. This wasn't the controlled environment of a boxing ring with rules and referees. This was walking into a predator's den. Caruso appeared with 2 bodyguards, their expensive suits poorly concealing shoulder holsters. Right on time, Mike. Follow me. They led him through a maze of corridors that had clearly been designed to confuse visitors and prevent easy escape. The underground facility that emerged at the end was sophisticated beyond anything Tyson had expected, professional lighting illuminated. Elevated seating for over 200 spectators. A regulation-size fighting cage dominated the center of the space, surrounded by cameras for recording. A medical station staffed with actual healthcare workers occupied one corner. This wasn't some back alley operation. This was $1 million enterprise. Wealthy patrons in expensive clothes mingled with cocktails, their excited chatter creating an atmosphere of anticipation that made Tyson's skin crawl. These weren't fight fans. They were voyeurs seeking entertainment from children suffering. The young fighters were kept in a separate area, supervised by Walsh and several assistants. Tyson spotted them immediately, ages 15 to 19, all clearly from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. They looked malnourished and scared, but also desperate for the money they'd been promised. His heart nearly stopped when he saw Jimmy in the group. His nephew had lost significant weight since Tyson had last seen him 3 months ago. A fresh black eye marked his young face, and his movements carried the careful tension of someone expecting violence at any moment. "Impressive, isn't it?" Caruso said, following Tyson's gaze. "We provide these young people with opportunities they'd never have otherwise. Structure, discipline, purpose." The evening's first fight began, and Tyson watched in horror as two teenagers who clearly had minimal training but maximum desperation entered the cage. The crowd cheered not for skill or sportsmanship, but for blood and brutality. The match was savage and brief. The larger boy hammered his opponent until the smaller kid collapsed unconscious. Medical staff carried the loser out on a stretcher, while the crowd celebrated the victor's authentic warrior spirit. "Beautiful, wasn't it?" Caruso asked. "Pure survival instinct. No rules, no safety nets, just natural selection in action." During intermission, Walsh approached their table, not recognizing Tyson in the expensive clothes and subdued lighting. "Enjoying the entertainment? These kids represent the future of real combat sports. Genuine hunger channeled into pure aggression." Tyson struggled to maintain his cover while every instinct screamed to attack Walsh immediately. "Very impressive," he managed to say. "The best part," Walsh continued, "is that we're actually helping them. These street kids were going to fight anyway. Drugs, gangs, poverty. We give them a chance to make real money from their natural talents." The next fight was announced, and Tyson's blood turned to ice as he heard the names: Jimmy Kirkland versus Marcus the Machine Johnson, a much larger 19-year-old with extensive amateur boxing experience. His nephew was about to enter that cage, and there was nothing Tyson could do to stop it without destroying their only chance to save all the kids. Walsh gave Tyson a behind-the-scenes tour while the crowd enjoyed intermission, proudly displaying his operation like a businessman showing off his factory. The full scope of the horror became clear as they walked through areas hidden from spectators. Living quarters housed fighters between events, bare mattresses in locked rooms that looked more like prison cells than dormitories. Training areas showed evidence of punishment beyond instruction, with bloodstains on mats and restraints mounted on walls. "The key is proper motivation," Walsh explained. "These kids respond to clear consequences. Perform well, earn privileges. Disappoint us, face correction." Medical facilities were designed to treat injuries just enough to get fighters back into action quickly. Ashley Patterson sat on an examination table while a doctor checked her pupils, clearly evaluating her for concussion symptoms before her upcoming fight. Tyson managed a brief conversation with Jimmy by pretending to evaluate him as a potential betting choice. His nephew didn't recognize his uncle in the expensive suit and arena lighting, which broke Tyson's heart even as it maintained his cover. "I can't quit now, man," Jimmy said, trying to sound tough while his voice shook. "I owe them money for training and housing and medical care. If I win enough fights, I'll be clear and can go home." The debt bondage system was elegant in its cruelty. Fighters were charged for everything: training, food, shelter, medical treatment, ensuring they could never earn enough to leave. Those who caused problems faced punishment matches against much larger, more experienced opponents. "It's simple. Economics," Walsh said with obvious pride. "Supply and demand, reward and consequence. These kids learn valuable life lessons about their place in the world." Jimmy's fight was announced as the evening's main event, hyped to the bloodthirsty crowd as a test of pure heart versus superior training. Tyson watched his nephew enter the cage, 17 years old, and facing an opponent who outweighed him by 40 pounds. The fight was brutal from the opening bell. Johnson had legitimate boxing skills and no mercy, systematically breaking down Jimmy with body shots and combinations. The crowd roared approval as the younger boy absorbed punishment that would have stopped professional fights. Tyson's hands shook with rage as he was forced to maintain his cover while Jimmy took increasingly severe punishment. Romano's voice crackled through his earpiece. Hold position. We need more evidence of the full operation. Jimmy went down in the second round and didn't get back up. The crowd cheered as medical staff dragged his unconscious body from the cage. Tyson moved toward the medical area, but Caruso's hand on his arm stopped him. Don't worry about him, Caruso said dismissively. These kids are tougher than they look. He'll be fine for the next card. After Jimmy's beating, Caruso offered Tyson full partnership in the organization. Bring your name recognition and boxing contacts. We could expand this nationally within 2 years. Tyson agreed to consider the offer, scheduling a meeting for the following week to finalize details. As he prepared to leave, he saw Jimmy being loaded into an unmarked van, destination unknown. Walking to his car, Tyson contacted Romano through the wire. We move next week. I don't care what it takes, we're shutting this down. Copy that, Mike. We'll be ready. But as Tyson drove home through Detroit's empty streets, he wondered if they would be ready fast enough. Jimmy might not survive another fight like tonight's, and neither would the other kids trapped in Walsh's nightmare operation. Time was running out for everyone. Sunday morning brought Tyson to Detroit Police Headquarters for a briefing that would determine the fate of dozens of young fighters. Detective Romano had assembled a task force including FBI agents. Given the interstate nature of the trafficking operation, Special Agent Maria Santos spread photographs and documents across the conference table. Based on your intelligence, we've identified 3 facilities: Detroit, Chicago, and Cleveland. This is a multi-million-dollar operation with political connections we're still mapping. The plan was ambitious. Coordinated simultaneous raids on all 3 locations the following Friday night. Federal resources would ensure they couldn't simply relocate again, but the logistics were complex. We need someone inside during the Detroit raid, Romano said, looking directly at Tyson. These kids have been betrayed by every adult they've trusted. They'll panic when we breach, possibly get hurt in the chaos. Tyson volunteered immediately, despite the obvious risks. They know me. Now, if they see someone who actually kept their promises, they might trust us enough to stay safe. Agent Santos outlined the legal requirements. They needed evidence of coercion, proof of financial exploitation, documentation of the interstate trafficking network, and testimony from the fighters themselves. The challenge is gathering enough evidence for conviction while protecting the victims, she explained. These kids are traumatized. They might not cooperate initially. Rita had been working with Dr. Reeves to document the medical evidence. 17 young fighters had been treated at various Detroit hospitals in the past 6 months, all with suspicious injury patterns consistent with forced combat. The medical records prove systematic abuse, Dr. Reeves reported via conference call. But we need the fighter's testimony to connect it to specific individuals. Jimmy's situation complicated everything. His injuries from the previous night's fight were severe enough to require hospitalization, but he was being held at an unknown location. We have to assume they're treating him just well enough to fight again, Santos said grimly. Romano revealed the final piece of their plan. Mike, you're scheduled to meet with Caruso's financial advisors on Friday to finalize your investment. We'll use that meeting as cover. When you're inside shaking hands, we hit all 3 facilities simultaneously. The meeting broke up with everyone understanding the stakes. This was their only chance to save the kids and stop the operation. If they failed, Walsh and Caruso would disappear permanently with their human cargo. That afternoon, Tyson received an unexpected call from Jimmy's cell phone. His nephew's voice was weak but determined. Uncle Mike, I know it's you. Some of the other kids recognized you from the fights on TV. Jimmy's words came slowly, pain evident in every syllable. I want to help. I know the layout of their main facility. I can guide your people through the building. Jimmy, you're hurt. You need medical attention. These kids need saving more than I need a doctor. Let me help fix what I helped break. Despite his injuries, Jimmy's offer was invaluable. He could identify escape routes, guard positions, and most importantly, where the fighters were kept when not performing. As Tyson hung up, Romano approached with news that chilled him to the bone. We have a problem, Mike. Someone leaked information about the planned raids. Caruso knows we're coming. Romano's revelation turned their carefully planned operation into a desperate gamble. Emergency meetings were called, surveillance was doubled, and the timeline accelerated dramatically. Instead of a coordinated Friday night assault, they would have to move within hours. Intelligence suggests they're planning to move the kids tonight, Agent Santos explained during the hasty briefing. If we lose them now, they disappear into a network we may never penetrate. Tyson had no choice but to proceed with his scheduled investment meeting, even knowing it was likely a trap. Romano assured him the task force would be monitoring and ready to move at his signal, but the betrayal had compromised everything. We don't know how much they know or who leaked it, Romano admitted. You'll be walking in blind. Before heading to what might be his final confrontation, Tyson visited Bobby at the hospital. The teenager's recovery was progressing well, but the news about the accelerated timeline worried him. You can't go in there alone, Bobby said, struggling to sit up despite his casted arm. These people are monsters, and they know you're coming. Carmen, now staying with Rita during the investigation, had accompanied them to the hospital. Mr. Tyson saved us once already, she said with fierce loyalty. He'll save the other kids too. Her faith was touching but terrifying. Tyson had built a reputation on certainty and power, but this situation was spinning beyond anyone's control. Detective Williams arrived with last-minute intelligence that confirmed their worst fears. Financial surveillance had detected large cash withdrawals from Caruso's accounts, and several properties associated with the organization had been quietly sold in the past week. They're liquidating assets and preparing to disappear, Williams reported. Tonight might be their final event before shutting down permanently. The implications were horrifying. A final event likely meant eliminating witnesses and evidence. The young fighters weren't just being moved, they were probably being prepared for disposal. Tyson arrived at the warehouse facility that evening to find unusual activity everywhere. Trucks were being loaded with equipment, documents were being burned in steel drums, and security presence had tripled. Caruso greeted him with the same cultured smile, but his eyes held a coldness that hadn't been there before. Change of plans, Mike. We're consolidating operations tonight. Your investment opportunity just became much more interesting. The atmosphere was tense, with armed men positioned at every exit. This wasn't a business meeting anymore. It was a trap closing around him. Where are we consolidating to? Tyson asked, trying to maintain his cover while scanning for escape routes. Somewhere your law enforcement friends will never find us, Caruso replied, his pretense finally dropping. You know, Mike, Detective Romano has been very helpful in keeping us informed about police interest in our activities. Amazing what a parent will do for their child's medical bills. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Romano, the man Tyson had trusted with Jimmy's life, had been feeding information to the criminals while pretending to help the investigation. Caruso's smile widened as he saw understanding dawn in Tyson's eyes. He told us all about your wire, your investigation, your bleeding heart concerns about these kids. But don't worry, we have a better use for a washed-up fighter with a guilty conscience. Armed men stepped forward, surrounding Tyson as his worst nightmare became reality. He was trapped, betrayed, and completely cut off from any hope of rescue. Caruso's bodyguards closed in around Tyson as the crime boss continued his revelation with obvious satisfaction. Detective Romano has been on our payroll for 2 years. Funny how medical bills can change a man's perspective on right and wrong. They searched Tyson thoroughly, finding the wire Romano had provided. Caruso held the small device up like a trophy. This is disappointing, Mike. I really thought we could work together as professionals. The full scope of Romano's betrayal became clear as Caruso explained how the detective had been providing protection for the fighting rings in exchange for monthly payments. His daughter needed expensive leukemia treatment. Amazing what fathers will do when their children are dying. Walsh appeared from the facility's depths, carrying a folder thick with fabricated evidence. Photographs showed Tyson at the underground fights. Financial records indicated payments to him, and sworn statements from coerced fighters painted him as a recruiter who had exploited their desperation. If you disappear tonight, you'll be remembered as the washed-up champion who returned to exploiting kids for money, Walsh said with vicious satisfaction. Your legacy becomes our protection. Caruso offered Tyson a choice that wasn't really a choice at all: become the public face of their legitimate expansion, using his name to recruit fighters while staying silent about the exploitation, or face complete destruction of his reputation followed by a quiet death. Think of it as community outreach, Caruso said mockingly. You'll be helping disadvantaged youth find opportunities in combat sports. The alternative was having his body discovered in circumstances that would support their narrative of a corrupt former champion who had gotten too deep into criminal activity. As Caruso's men prepared to escort Tyson to a more secure location, he spotted movement near the loading docks. Jimmy was among a group of fighters being loaded into a transport truck, barely conscious from his previous night's injuries. The sight of his nephew's condition triggered something primal in Tyson's psyche. All pretense of cooperation vanished as legendary explosive power erupted without warning. His first punch sent the nearest bodyguard crashing into a concrete pillar. The second dropped another man before anyone could react to the speed of his movement. Alarms began blaring throughout the facility as Tyson fought his way toward the loading area, where Jimmy was disappearing into the truck. But his escape attempt triggered a coordinated response. More security arrived from every direction, and the sound of gunfire echoed through the warehouse as Tyson realized he was trapped in a running battle with innocent kids caught in the crossfire. The truck carrying Jimmy pulled away into the Detroit night as Tyson ducked behind equipment crates, bullets ricocheting off metal around him. His wire was dead, his backup compromised, and his nephew was disappearing into a network designed to make people vanish forever. Romano's betrayal had cost them everything. Tyson crouched behind industrial equipment as bullets sparked off metal. Around him, the warehouse erupting in chaos as security forces tried to contain his explosive breakout. The truck carrying Jimmy and other young fighters was already disappearing through the loading dock exit. Caruso screamed orders over the gunfire, trying to coordinate his men while staying safely behind cover. Take him alive. We need him to disappear quietly, not become a martyr. But Walsh had other ideas, appearing with a pistol and firing wildly in Tyson's direction. He's seen too much. This ends now. The disagreement between his captors gave Tyson the opening he needed. Moving with speed that defied his age, he launched himself through the loading dock opening just as Walsh's bullet shattered concrete where his head had been. The Detroit night was cold and unforgiving as Tyson rolled behind a parked car, gunfire following him from the warehouse. He could see the truck's taillights in the distance, growing smaller with each passing second. His phone was dead, the wire was destroyed, and Romano's betrayal meant law enforcement backup wasn't coming. Worse, Walsh and Caruso now had evidence that could frame him as the mastermind of the entire operation. Sirens wailed in the distance, but Tyson realized they weren't coming to help. Romano would spin the response to support the criminal's narrative. By morning, he would be wanted for assault, kidnapping, and running an illegal fighting ring that exploited children. He made his way through Detroit's industrial district, staying to shadows and avoiding main streets. Tyson assessed the devastating cost of the night's failure. Jimmy and the other fighters were gone, possibly forever. The evidence they'd gathered was compromised, and he was now a fugitive with a target on his back. But the worst realization came when he reached a safe phone and called Rita. Her voice was strained with panic and fear. Mike, where are you? The news is saying you're wanted in connection with underground fighting rings. They're calling you the ringleader. Romano's manufactured evidence was already being presented to media outlets. Photographs of Tyson at the fights, taken out of context, supported a narrative of a former champion who had returned to criminal behavior. Rita, listen to me carefully. I'm being framed, but I need you to stay away from me until I can prove it. Romano is working for them. That's impossible. He's the one who, he's been feeding them information the whole time. His daughters. Medical bills made him vulnerable, and they bought him. The line went quiet as Rita processed this betrayal. Finally, she spoke with steel in her voice. What do you need me to do? Take care of Bobby and Carmen, and find Detective Williams. She might be the only honest cop left on this case. As dawn broke over Detroit, Mike Tyson found himself in a position he'd never imagined. A fugitive from justice, branded as the very monster he'd been fighting to stop, with no allies except a community center director and a teenager with a broken arm. But he still had one advantage his enemies couldn't take away: the absolute certainty that he would never stop fighting for those kids, no matter what it cost him. The real battle was just beginning. Dawn broke gray and cold over Detroit as local news broadcasts filled the airwaves with breaking coverage. Former heavyweight champion Mike Tyson wanted in connection with underground fighting rings that exploited minors. The official story painted him as the mastermind of a criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. Tyson huddled in an abandoned building on Detroit's east side, wounded but alive. His escape from the warehouse had cost him a bullet, graze along his ribs, cuts from broken glass, and bruises from his desperate flight through the industrial district. But he was free, which was more than he could say for Jimmy and the other kids. The television in a nearby diner showed his booking photo from decades past alongside recent footage of the community center demonstration. Romano appeared on camera, his performance flawless as he described the shocking discovery that a beloved boxing legend had been exploiting vulnerable children. "We have financial records, witness testimony, and photographic evidence of Mr. Tyson's involvement in these illegal fighting operations," Romano said with practiced sincerity. It appears he used his reputation to gain access to at-risk youth, then recruited them for underground combat events. The community was splitting down the middle. Some neighbors who had witnessed Tyson's gentleness with Bobby and Carmen refused to believe the accusations. Others pointed to his criminal past as proof that leopards don't change their spots. Rita faced enormous pressure from the community center board to distance herself from Tyson completely. Emergency meetings were called, lawyers consulted, and insurance policies reviewed. The scandal threatened to destroy everything she'd built over decades of service, but Rita's response was characteristic. She hung up on anyone suggesting she abandoned Tyson and doubled down on her investigation of the real criminals. Through a network of street contacts, Tyson learned that Jimmy had been moved to a secure medical facility controlled by Caruso's organization. His nephew's injuries from the fight were severe: possible internal bleeding, definite concussion, multiple fractures that weren't being properly treated. "They're keeping him alive, but just barely," reported the homeless veteran who served as Tyson's eyes and ears. "Kid's asking for you, Mike. Keeps saying he's sorry he didn't listen." The guilt was crushing. Jimmy had sought belonging and guidance, and Tyson's own reputation had driven him toward the very predators they'd been fighting. Now his nephew was paying the price for adult failures and betrayals. Dr. Reeves, operating on information from Rita, managed to get word to Tyson about Jimmy's medical condition. The news was devastating. Without proper treatment, some of his nephew's injuries could become permanent disabilities. Night fell on his first day as a fugitive. Tyson sat in the abandoned building staring at a photo of Jimmy from his wallet. The smiling 16-year-old in the picture looked nothing like the broken boy he'd seen being loaded into that truck. "I'm coming for you, Jimmy," he whispered to the darkness. "Uncle Mike's coming." But first, he had to figure out how to fight. An entire system of corruption with nothing but his fists and his conscience. 3 days into Tyson's life as a fugitive, the situation had deteriorated beyond his worst fears. Romano held a press conference revealing additional evidence of Tyson's criminal involvement: bank records showing large cash deposits, coerced testimony from terrified young fighters, and security footage allegedly showing him at multiple illegal venues. The detective's performance was masterful, complete with righteous indignation about children being exploited by someone they had trusted. These young people looked up to Mr. Tyson as a role model. He used that trust to lure them into dangerous situations for his own profit. Federal warrants had been issued, and a task force was actively hunting for Tyson throughout Michigan. His photo appeared on wanted posters in every police station, and a substantial reward was offered for information leading to his arrest. Rita faced the community center board in an emergency session that would determine her future and the center's relationship with Tyson. The pressure was enormous. Major donors threatened to withdraw funding, parents demanded answers, and lawyers warned about liability issues. "The board has no choice but to ban Mike Tyson from these premises permanently," announced Chairman Robert Sterling, a local businessman who had never liked Rita's progressive approach. Furthermore, all programs associated with his name must be canceled immediately. Several families withdrew their children from Rita's programs entirely, frightened by media coverage that painted anyone connected to Tyson as potentially dangerous. The community center that had been thriving just a week earlier now felt empty and hostile, but Bobby Martinez refused to stay silent. Despite his family's fears and against medical advice, he appeared on Channel 7's morning show with his arm still in a cast, determined to tell the truth about what he'd witnessed. Mike Tyson didn't hurt me. He helped me, Bobby said directly to the camera, his young voice steady despite obvious nervousness. Sensei Walsh is the one who broke my arm. On purpose. Mr. Tyson stopped him from hurting other kids and stayed with me at the hospital. The teenager's testimony was powerful and specific, describing exactly how Walsh had deliberately injured him and how Tyson had provided comfort and protection afterward. But Romano quickly undermined Bobby's credibility, suggesting the boy had been manipulated by a master criminal. That night, the retaliation began. Bobby's apartment was vandalized with spray-painted messages calling him a liar. Carmen was followed home from school by men in a dark sedan who made no effort to hide their surveillance that Rita's car was vandalized, her tires slashed in the community center parking lot. Someone threw a brick through her home's front window, with a note attached, "Stop defending criminals or face consequences." The message was clear. Anyone supporting Tyson would become a target of the same organization that had framed him. Tyson, monitoring the situation from his hideout, realized his supporters were paying a price for their loyalty. The same people who had shown him kindness were now facing harassment and intimidation. As he watched Bobby's brave television appearance on a stolen smartphone, Tyson made a decision that would determine everything that followed. He couldn't let good people suffer for his mistakes. It was time to stop running and start fighting back. Detective Patricia Williams knocked on the door of Tyson's safe house at dawn, carrying a manila folder that would change everything. Rita had connected them after Williams approached her with suspicions about Romano's sudden wealth and suspicious behavior patterns. "I've been investigating my partner for 2 months," Williams explained, spreading financial documents across the makeshift table. Bank deposits that don't match his salary, meetings with known criminals, and most damning, his daughter never had leukemia. The medical records Williams had obtained through official channels showed Romano's daughter was perfectly healthy, had never been treated for cancer, and had never required expensive medical care. The entire justification for his corruption was a fabrication. "He's been feeding information to Caruso's organization for over 2 years," Williams continued. "Every raid that failed, every investigation that went nowhere, every time we got close and they vanished," Romano warned them. More importantly, Williams had been secretly recording her conversations with Romano, gathering evidence of his corruption while pretending to support the investigation into Tyson. Her recordings proved Romano knew about the frame-up and had actively participated in manufacturing evidence. "I can clear your name, but it's going to take time to build a case that sticks," Williams warned. "Romano has protection throughout the department. We need to be smarter than they are." Rita brought more encouraging news. Bobby's television appearance had sparked community organizing on social media. Parents whose children had disappeared after Walsh's recruitment were speaking out, sharing similar stories of promises made and children lost. Carmen, despite being only 12, had become an unexpected leader in the online campaign. Using hashtags like #SaveOurKids and #MyKidIsAnInnocent, she was coordinating testimony from families across Detroit who had encountered Walsh's operation. "Kids believe other kids more than adults," Rita explained. "Carmen's been getting them to share their stories online where their parents wouldn't let them talk to police." The community response was building momentum, but it was also drawing dangerous attention. Walsh's people were monitoring social media, identifying families who spoke out and targeting them for intimidation. That evening, Williams arranged a meeting with honest federal agents who were investigating Romano's unit for corruption. Agent Maria Santos, who had been excluded from Romano's version of the task force, was building her own case against the criminal network. "We've been watching Romano for months, but we needed someone inside his operation to gather evidence," Santos explained. "You were never supposed to be the target, Mike. You were supposed to be our witness." The federal investigation had identified the full scope of the criminal enterprise: 3 fighting facilities, dozens of missing children, millions in illegal gambling revenue, and corruption reaching into city government and law enforcement. "The problem is that Romano destroyed most of the evidence we were gathering," Santos continued. We need new proof, new witnesses, and most importantly, we need to rescue those kids before they disappear permanently. As the meeting broke up, Williams provided Tyson with secure communication equipment and a new plan. Instead of hiding like a fugitive, he would become an active investigator, working with honest law enforcement to expose the corruption from within. It's dangerous, Williams warned. If Romano realizes we're onto him, he'll accelerate their timeline for eliminating evidence. Tyson looked at the photos of missing children spread across the table, Jimmy's face prominent among them. More dangerous than leaving those kids in their hands. Let's do this. The hunter was about to become the hunted. Rita Fleming stood before a packed Roosevelt Community Center gymnasium, defying the board's restrictions and her own safety concerns. Over 100 neighbors, parents, and young people had answered her call, many sharing stories of children who had disappeared or been approached by Walsh's recruiters. They want us to be afraid, Rita began, her voice carrying the authority earned through decades of service. They want us to doubt what we've seen with our own eyes and heard with our own ears. But this community knows the difference between a protector and a predator. The meeting became a powerful moment of community organizing. Parents like Mrs. Patterson, Marcus's mother whose son Walsh had originally terrorized, spoke about witnessing Tyson's intervention during the demonstration. I saw him kneel beside that injured boy with more gentleness than I've ever seen from any man, she testified. That's not the behavior of someone who hurts children. That's someone who protects them. Bobby Martinez, his arms still in a cast, gave the most compelling testimony. He described in detail how Walsh had deliberately broken his arm, how Tyson had provided comfort and protection, and how the real criminals were still operating while an innocent man was hunted. Mr. Tyson didn't recruit me for anything, Bobby said to the rapt audience. He saved me from someone who did. Detective Williams, in plain clothes and officially off duty, presented the community with evidence of Romano's corruption. She explained how the official investigation had been sabotaged from within and asked for their help in exposing the truth. Your police department has honest officers who want to help, she assured them. But we need your voices, your testimonies, and your courage to overcome the corruption that's been protecting these criminals. Carmen Martinez, despite her age, had become the social media coordinator for their grassroots campaign. Using her smartphone and natural tech skills, she helped create viral videos featuring Bobby's testimony, photos of Walsh's violence, and stories from affected families. The hashtag #SaveOurKids hashtag was gaining national attention, with supporters sharing stories and demanding justice. Local news stations, initially focused on Tyson's alleged crimes, were beginning to investigate the community's counter-narrative, but the campaign's success brought retaliation. Romano attempted to arrest Rita and Williams for interfering with an ongoing federal investigation, but the presence of news cameras and community witnesses made the attempt backfire spectacularly. Video of Romano aggressively confronting community members while they defended their children went viral, raising serious questions about his methods and motivations. The detective's behavior looked exactly like what it was: corruption exposed to sunlight. Dr. Patricia Reeves arrived at the meeting with medical evidence that proved systematic abuse. I've been treating suspicious injuries for months, she testified. 17 different teenagers, all with trauma patterns consistent with forced combat. The medical records, with identifying information removed to protect privacy, showed clear evidence of organized violence against minors. Combined with the community testimony, it painted a picture of systematic exploitation that couldn't be ignored. As the meeting concluded, Rita announced the formation of a community safety coalition dedicated to protecting local children and exposing the truth about Walsh's operation. Volunteers signed up to help with everything from legal support to social media coordination. The momentum was building, but everyone understood the stakes. They were challenging powerful people with resources and connections, people who had already demonstrated their willingness to harm children and frame innocent adults. That night, as Tyson watched coverage of the community meeting from his hideout, he felt something he hadn't experienced in days: hope. The people he had tried to protect were now protecting him, proving that courage could be contagious when good people decided to stand together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, he knew he wasn't fighting alone anymore. Dawn broke. Gray and cold over Detroit, as local news broadcasts filled the airwaves with breaking coverage. Former heavyweight champion Mike Tyson wanted in connection with underground fighting rings that exploited minors. The official story painted him as the mastermind of a criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. Tyson huddled in an abandoned building on Detroit's east side, wounded but alive. His escape from the warehouse had cost him a bullet, graze along his ribs, cuts from broken glass, and bruises from his desperate flight through the industrial district. But he was free, which was more than he could say for Jimmy and the other kids. The television in a nearby diner showed his booking photo from decades past alongside recent footage of the community center demonstration. Romano appeared on camera, his performance flawless as he described the shocking discovery that a beloved boxing legend had been exploiting vulnerable children. "We have financial records, witness testimony, and photographic evidence of Mr. Tyson's involvement in these illegal fighting operations," Romano said with practiced sincerity. It appears he used his reputation to gain access to at-risk youth, then recruited them for underground combat events. The community was splitting down the middle. Some neighbors who had witnessed Tyson's gentleness with Bobby and Carmen refused to believe the accusations. Others pointed to his criminal past as proof that leopards don't change their spots. Rita faced enormous pressure from the community center board to distance herself from Tyson completely. Emergency meetings were called, lawyers consulted, and insurance policies reviewed. The scandal threatened to destroy everything she'd built over decades of service. But Rita's response was characteristic. She hung up on anyone suggesting she abandoned Tyson and doubled down on her investigation of the real criminals. Through a network of street contacts, Tyson learned that Jimmy had been moved to a secure medical facility controlled by Caruso's organization. His nephew's injuries from the fight were severe: possible internal bleeding, definite concussion, multiple fractures that weren't being properly treated. "They're keeping him alive, but just barely," reported the homeless veteran who served as Tyson's eyes and ears. "Kid's asking for you, Mike. Keeps saying he's sorry he didn't listen." The guilt was crushing. Jimmy had sought belonging and guidance, and Tyson's own reputation had driven him toward the very predators they'd been fighting. Now his nephew was paying the price for adult failures and betrayals. Dr. Reeves, operating on information from Rita, managed to get word to Tyson about Jimmy's medical condition. The news was devastating. Without proper treatment, some of his nephew's injuries could become permanent disabilities. As night fell on his first day as a fugitive, Tyson sat in the abandoned building staring at a photo of Jimmy from his wallet. The smiling 16-year-old in the picture looked nothing like the broken boy he'd seen being loaded into that truck. "I'm coming for you, Jimmy," he whispered to the darkness. "Uncle Mike's coming." But first, he had to figure out how to fight. An entire system of corruption with nothing but his fists and his conscience. 3 days into Tyson's life as a fugitive, the situation had deteriorated beyond his worst fears. Romano held a press conference revealing additional evidence of Tyson's criminal involvement: bank records showing large cash deposits, coerced testimony from terrified young fighters, and security footage allegedly showing him at multiple illegal venues. The detective's performance was masterful, complete with righteous indignation about children being exploited by someone they had trusted. These young people looked up to Mr. Tyson as a role model. He used that trust to lure them into dangerous situations for his own profit. Federal warrants had been issued, and a task force was actively hunting for Tyson throughout Michigan. His photo appeared on wanted posters in every police station, and a substantial reward was offered for information leading to his arrest. Rita faced the community center board in an emergency session that would determine her future and the center's relationship with Tyson. The pressure was enormous. Major donors threatened to withdraw funding, parents demanded answers, and lawyers warned about liability issues. "The board has no choice but to ban Mike Tyson from these premises permanently," announced Chairman Robert Sterling, a local businessman who had never liked Rita's progressive approach. Furthermore, all programs associated with his name must be canceled immediately. Several families withdrew their children from Rita's programs entirely, frightened by media coverage that painted anyone connected to Tyson as potentially dangerous. The community center that had been thriving just a week earlier now felt empty and hostile, but Bobby Martinez refused to stay silent. Despite his family's fears and against medical advice, he appeared on Channel 7's morning show with his arm still in a cast, determined to tell the truth about what he'd witnessed. Mike Tyson didn't hurt me. He helped me, Bobby said directly to the camera, his young voice steady despite obvious nervousness. Sensei Walsh is the one who broke my arm. On purpose. Mr. Tyson stopped him from hurting other kids and stayed with me at the hospital. The teenager's testimony was powerful and specific, describing exactly how Walsh had deliberately injured him and how Tyson had provided comfort and protection afterward. But Romano quickly undermined Bobby's credibility, suggesting the boy had been manipulated by a master criminal. That night, the retaliation began. Bobby's apartment was vandalized with spray-painted messages calling him a liar. Carmen was followed home from school by men in a dark sedan who made no effort to hide their surveillance that Rita's car was vandalized, her tires slashed in the community center parking lot. Someone threw a brick through her home's front window. With a note attached, "Stop defending criminals or face consequences." The message was clear. Anyone supporting Tyson would become a target of the same organization that had framed him. Tyson, monitoring the situation from his hideout, realized his supporters were paying a price for their loyalty. The same people who had shown him kindness were now facing harassment and intimidation. As he watched Bobby's brave television appearance on a stolen smartphone, Tyson made a decision that would determine everything that followed. He couldn't let good people suffer for his mistakes. It was time to stop running and start fighting back. Detective Patricia Williams knocked on the door of Tyson's safe house at dawn, carrying a manila folder that would change everything. Rita had connected them after Williams approached her with suspicions about Romano's sudden wealth and suspicious behavior patterns. "I've been investigating my partner for 2 months," Williams explained, spreading financial documents across the makeshift table. Bank deposits that don't match his salary, meetings with known criminals, and most damning, his daughter never had leukemia. The medical records Williams had obtained through official channels showed Romano's daughter was perfectly healthy, had never been treated for cancer, and had never required expensive medical care. The entire justification for his corruption was a fabrication. "He's been feeding information to Caruso's organization for over 2 years, Williams continued. "Every raid that failed, every investigation that went nowhere, every time we got close and they vanished," Romano warned them. More importantly, Williams had been secretly recording her conversations with Romano, gathering evidence of his corruption while pretending to support the investigation into Tyson. Her recordings proved Romano knew about the frame-up and had actively participated in manufacturing evidence. "I can clear your name, but it's going to take time to build a case that sticks," Williams warned. "Romano has protection throughout the department. We need to be smarter than they are." Rita brought more encouraging news. Bobby's television appearance had sparked community organizing on social media. Parents whose children had disappeared after Walsh's recruitment were speaking out, sharing similar stories of promises made and children lost. Carmen, despite being only 12, had become an unexpected leader in the online campaign. Using hashtags like #SaveOurKids and #MyKidIsAnInnocent, she was coordinating testimony from families across Detroit who had encountered Walsh's operation. "Kids believe other kids more than adults," Rita explained. "Carmen's been getting them to share their stories online where their parents wouldn't let them talk to police." The community response was building momentum, but it was also drawing dangerous attention. Walsh's people were monitoring social media, identifying families who spoke out and targeting them for intimidation. That evening, Williams arranged a meeting with honest federal agents who were investigating Romano's unit for corruption. Agent Maria Santos, who had been excluded from Romano's version of the task force, was building her own case against the criminal network. "We've been watching Romano for months, but we needed someone inside his operation to gather evidence," Santos explained. "You were never supposed to be the target, Mike. You were supposed to be our witness." The federal investigation had identified the full scope of the criminal enterprise: 3 fighting facilities, dozens of missing children, millions in illegal gambling revenue, and corruption reaching into city government and law enforcement. "The problem is that Romano destroyed most of the evidence we were gathering," Santos continued. "We need new proof, new witnesses, and most importantly, we need to rescue those kids before they disappear permanently." As the meeting broke up, Williams provided Tyson with secure communication equipment and a new plan. Instead of hiding like a fugitive, He would become an active investigator, working with honest law enforcement to expose the corruption from within. It's dangerous, Williams warned. If Romano realizes we're onto him, he'll accelerate their timeline for eliminating evidence. Tyson looked at the photos of missing children spread across the table, Jimmy's face prominent among them. More dangerous than leaving those kids in their hands. Let's do this. The hunter was about to become the hunted. Rita Fleming stood before a packed Roosevelt Community Center gymnasium, defying the board's restrictions and her own safety concerns. Over 100 neighbors, parents, and young people had answered her call, many sharing stories of children who had disappeared or been approached by Walsh's recruiters. They want us to be afraid, Rita began, her voice carrying the authority earned through decades of service. They want us to doubt what we've seen with our own eyes and heard with our own ears. But this community knows the difference between a protector and a predator. The meeting became a powerful moment of community organizing. Parents like Mrs. Patterson, Marcus's mother whose son Walsh had originally terrorized, spoke about witnessing Tyson's intervention during the demonstration. I saw him kneel beside that injured boy with more gentleness than I've ever seen from any man, she testified. That's not the behavior of someone who hurts children. That's someone who protects them. Bobby Martinez, his arms still in a cast, gave the most compelling testimony. He described in detail how Walsh had deliberately broken his arm, how Tyson had provided comfort and protection, and how the real criminals were still operating while an innocent man was hunted. Mr. Tyson didn't recruit me for anything, Bobby said to the rapt audience. He saved me from someone who did. Detective Williams, in plain clothes and officially off duty, presented the community with evidence of Romano's corruption. She explained how the official investigation had been sabotaged from within and asked for their help in exposing the truth. Your police department has honest officers who want to help, she assured them. But we need your voices, your testimonies, and your courage to overcome the corruption that's been protecting these criminals. Carmen Martinez, despite her age, had become the social media coordinator for their grassroots campaign. Using her smartphone and natural tech skills, she helped create viral videos featuring Bobby's testimony, photos of Walsh's violence, and stories from affected families. The hashtag #SaveOurKids hashtag was gaining national attention, with supporters sharing stories and demanding justice. Local news stations, initially focused on Tyson's alleged crimes, were beginning to investigate the community's counter-narrative, but the campaign's success brought retaliation. Romano attempted to arrest Rita and Williams for interfering with an ongoing federal investigation, but the presence of news cameras and community witnesses made the attempt backfire spectacularly. Video of Romano aggressively confronting community members while they defended their children went viral, raising serious questions about his methods and motivations. The detective's behavior looked exactly like what it was: corruption exposed to sunlight. Dr. Patricia Reeves arrived at the meeting with medical evidence that proved systematic abuse. I've been treating suspicious injuries for months, she testified. 17 different teenagers, all with trauma patterns consistent with forced combat. The medical records, with identifying information removed to protect privacy, showed clear evidence of organized violence against minors. Combined with the community testimony, it painted a picture of systematic exploitation that couldn't be ignored. As the meeting concluded, Rita announced the formation of a community safety coalition dedicated to protecting local children and exposing the truth about Walsh's operation. Volunteers signed up to help with everything from legal support to social media coordination. The momentum was building, but everyone understood the stakes. They were challenging powerful people with resources and connections, people who had already demonstrated their willingness to harm children and frame innocent adults. That night, as Tyson watched coverage of the community meeting from his hideout, he felt something he hadn't experienced in days: hope. The people he had tried to protect were now protecting him, proving that courage could be contagious when good people decided to stand together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, he knew he wasn't fighting alone anymore. Dr. Patricia Reeves met Tyson and Williams at the hospital after midnight, providing the final piece of evidence needed to prove systematic abuse of minors. Her medical files accumulated. Beat him and the kids go free, Walsh announced to the global audience still watching via internet stream. lose, and, well, legends have to die sometime. Cell phone cameras captured everything from multiple angles, ensuring that whatever happened would be broadcast worldwide. The spectators, initially panicked by the federal presence, now pressed closer to witness what they believed would be the ultimate spectacle. In the holding area, Ashley and Jimmy stood with the other young fighters, watching their potential savior face an opponent 30 years younger and 40 pounds heavier. "He really came back for us," Ashley whispered, her voice containing hope for the first time in months. Tyson entered the makeshift ring knowing this was more than physical combat. It was a battle between two philosophies. Johnson represented exploitation, conditioning, and the reduction of human beings to commodities. Tyson embodied protection, wisdom, and the idea that strength should serve justice rather than profit. The fight began with Johnson's overwhelming physical assault, trying to end things quickly through brute force. His technique was excellent, his conditioning perfect, but his approach was purely mechanical. Destroy the opponent through systematic violence. Tyson absorbed the initial barrage, using movement and defensive skills honed over decades of professional combat. At 58, he couldn't match Johnson's physical attributes, but he possessed something the younger man lacked: experience fighting for something greater than personal gain. The crowd's bloodthirsty cheers gradually shifted as they witnessed not just combat, but a masterclass in boxing intelligence. Tyson's legendary speed was still there, guided now by wisdom rather than rage. His combinations were surgical, targeted, designed to neutralize rather than destroy. Johnson began showing frustration as his superior physical gifts couldn't overcome Tyson's tactical brilliance. The younger man had been trained to dominate through strength and conditioning, but had never faced an opponent who fought with both skill and purpose. The end came suddenly. Johnson, desperate to prove his superiority, overcommit to a powerful combination that left him momentarily vulnerable. Tyson's counterpunch was perfectly timed and devastatingly accurate, dropping the larger man to the canvas. But instead of celebrating victory, Tyson immediately knelt beside his fallen opponent, checking for serious injury and helping Johnson to his feet. The gesture of mercy towards someone who had been turned into a weapon spoke louder than any words about the difference between a champion and a killer. Walsh screamed in rage as his perfect ending dissolved into something resembling actual sportsmanship. His empire was crumbling, his fighters were seeing an alternative to endless violence, and federal agents were finally breaching his security barriers. In desperation, he pulled a pistol from his jacket and aimed it at Ashley Patterson's head. "If I can't have my empire, nobody gets anything." The arena fell deadly silent as Walsh's gun remained trained on Ashley's temple, his face contorted with the rage of a man watching his twisted kingdom collapse. Federal agents had weapons drawn, but couldn't risk a shot with innocent fighters in the line of fire. "It's over, Derek," Tyson said calmly, his hands raised but his voice carrying absolute authority. "Let them go home to their families." "Home?" Walsh laughed bitterly. "These kids don't have homes. They have poverty, neglect, and futures as criminals or victims. I gave them purpose, structure, a way to earn real money." Ashley stood perfectly still, her eyes locked on Tyson's face rather than the weapon pressed against her head. After months of conditioning and terror, she had finally seen what genuine strength looked like. Not the ability to hurt others, but the willingness to protect them. The standoff stretched through agonizing seconds as Walsh's grip tightened on the pistol. His entire operation was collapsing around him, but his ego demanded one final act of control over the children he had claimed to be helping. The resolution came from an unexpected source. Detective Romano appeared in the arena entrance, but not as Walsh's corrupt ally. Agent Santos had finally presented him with a choice: cooperate fully with the federal investigation or face decades in prison for child trafficking. "Put it down, Derek," Romano called out, his service weapon drawn. "It's finished. All of it." Walsh spun toward Romano with wild eyes, momentarily shifting his aim away from Ashley. That split second was enough for Tyson to move, his legendary speed carrying him forward to shield the girl while federal agents ended the threat with professional precision. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks like scenes from a redemption story. Walsh, Caruso, and their network of corrupt officials faced federal charges that would ensure they never again had access to vulnerable children. The 3 fighting facilities were shut down permanently, with evidence leading to prosecutions. Across multiple states, Bobby Martinez's broken arm healed completely, and an anonymous scholarship fund appeared to cover his college education. He returned to school determined to become a social worker, inspired by Rita's example of protecting community children. Carmen continued living with Rita, but Bobby visited daily as his construction job evolved into legitimate training for a career in building management. For the first time since their father left, the Martinez family had genuine stability and hope for the future. The Roosevelt Community Center received an unprecedented outpouring of donations after the story broke. Nationally, Rita became executive director of an expanded facility offering comprehensive youth programs that addressed education, athletics, job training, and mentorship. Jimmy moved in with Tyson permanently, beginning both physical and psychological therapy to address his trauma. Under his uncle's patient guidance, he discovered that legitimate boxing training could channel his anger and energy into positive outcomes without exploitation. Ashley Patterson chose a different path, working with Dr. Reeves to help identify and treat other young victims of fighting rings across the country. Her experience, though traumatic, gave her unique insight into helping others escape similar exploitation. 6 months later, the community center hosted its grand reopening celebration. Tyson, no longer a fugitive but now a recognized community hero, taught boxing classes that emphasized discipline, respect, and using strength to protect others rather than harm them. He demonstrated proper technique to a dozen teenagers, including both Ashley and Jimmy. Rita watched from the doorway with satisfaction. The gymnasium that had witnessed Derek Walsh's cruelty now echoed with the sounds of legitimate instruction and genuine laughter. Carmen ran up to Tyson with a newspaper article about fighting rings being shut down in Chicago and Cleveland, with authorities crediting Detroit's investigation as the catalyst for a nationwide crackdown on child exploitation. The final scene played out that evening as Bobby, his arm completely healed, sparred lightly with Jimmy under Tyson's supervision. Their movements showed skill developing through proper instruction rather than survival necessity, technique learned through encouragement rather than fear. Rita turned off the gymnasium lights as the evening session ended, watching these young people head home to families who no longer feared for their safety. Tomorrow would bring more training, more mentorship, more opportunities to prove that every person could become a champion of something greater than themselves. Mike Tyson locked the community center door behind him, no longer the isolated figure seeking redemption who had sat in the back row months earlier. He had found what he'd been searching for since leaving prison: the chance to use his strength not for personal glory, but to protect others who needed protection. The legend had become something better than a champion. He had become a guardian. If you liked the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel. Over 6 months, showed 17 different teenagers treated for injuries consistent with forced combat. These aren't training accidents, Dr. Reeves explained, spreading x-rays across the conference room table. Deliberate fractures, targeted tissue damage, psychological trauma designed to create compliance through fear. The documentation provided irrefutable proof that children were being systematically brutalized, but they still needed to locate where Walsh had moved his operation. After the warehouse raid, Williams had been working her network of honest cops and federal contacts throughout the week. Surveillance picked up unusual activity at an abandoned automotive plant on Detroit's southwest side. Multiple trucks, security installations, and most importantly, soundproofing equipment. The location made tactical sense. The massive facility provided space for a large-scale operation while remaining hidden from casual observation. Multiple exit routes would allow quick evacuation if necessary. Jimmy, whose condition had stabilized after Williams arranged medical care through legitimate channels, insisted on participating in the rescue operation despite his injuries. "I know the layout of their setup," he argued, his voice still weak but determined. "They move the same equipment between locations. I can guide you through the building and identify where they keep the fighters." Rita brought intelligence from the community network that had been monitoring social media and local criminal activity. Parents are reporting their missing children have been seen in that area. Mrs. Washington saw her son Marcus in the back of a truck 3 days ago. Agent Santos coordinated with Williams to plan the assault. Federal resources were finally being properly deployed, but the timeline was critical. Intelligence suggested Walsh and Caruso were planning a final major event before shutting down permanently. They're calling it a championship tournament, Santos explained. Winner-take-all elimination matches with online streaming to international audiences. This isn't just local exploitation anymore. It's gone global. The implications were horrifying. A tournament format meant fighters would be pushed beyond any reasonable limits, with elimination potentially meaning more than just losing a match. Williams received urgent intelligence that accelerated their timeline dramatically. Romano knows we're onto him. He's warning Caruso that we've located their facility. If we don't move tonight, they evacuate everything and disappear forever. The final assault plan was desperate but necessary. Tyson would infiltrate during the tournament as planned, coordinating with federal agents positioned around the perimeter. Jimmy would guide the rescue teams to the fighters' holding areas while Williams led the evidence-gathering operation. Remember, these kids have been traumatized and conditioned to distrust all adults, Santos warned. They might resist rescue. Initially, that's why we need you in there, Mike, someone they might actually believe is trying to help them. As the team prepared for what could be their final chance to save the children, Tyson looked at the photos of missing fighters spread across the table. Jimmy's face was prominent among them, but so were Ashley Patterson, Marcus Washington, and a dozen other kids whose families were praying for their safe return. Tonight we bring them all home, Tyson promised. The abandoned Riverside automotive plant loomed against Detroit's night sky, its broken windows and rusted infrastructure hiding a sophisticated criminal operation. Federal agents had surrounded the facility, but the building's size and complexity made a traditional assault extremely dangerous. Tyson approached through a maintenance entrance Jimmy had identified during his captivity, wearing tactical gear provided by Agent Santos's team. His nephew guided him via radio, his voice steady despite obvious pain from his recent injuries. Main arena is in the old assembly area, Jimmy whispered through the comm system. They've got seating for maybe 300 people, plus camera crews for internet streaming. Inside, Tyson discovered the full horror of Walsh's expanded operation. The automotive plant had been converted into a multi-level fighting complex with broadcast equipment for streaming matches to international audiences paying premium prices for authentic street combat. The scale was staggering. This wasn't just local exploitation anymore, but a global entertainment business built on children's suffering. Wealthy spectators from around the world could watch live fights featuring desperate American teenagers. Tonight's event was a tournament-style elimination series where fighters competed until only one remained standing. The marketing promised pure survival combat, with no rules, no mercy, no escape. Ashley Patterson sat in the fighters' preparation area, her face showing the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone pushed beyond all reasonable limits. At 17, she had been transformed into the organization's star attraction, but Tyson could see the terrified girl beneath the conditioned warrior facade. They said if I win tonight, I earn my freedom, Ashley told him when he approached disguised as a medical assistant. But I've heard that promise before. Other young fighters showed similar conditioning, desperate hope mixed with learned helplessness. They wanted to believe escape was possible while knowing their captors controlled every aspect of their lives. Walsh supervised the evening's preparations with obvious excitement, treating the tournament like a legitimate sporting event rather than systematic child abuse. He moved between fighters, making final adjustments to matchups and betting odds. The first elimination matches were brutal beyond anything Tyson had witnessed during his initial infiltration. The tournament format pushed fighters beyond exhaustion into genuine life-threatening danger. While the global audience cheered for increasing levels of violence, AS federal agents worked to position themselves for the coordinated assault. Tyson realized Walsh had been expecting him all along. Security cameras tracked his movement through the facility, and guards herded him subtly toward the main arena rather than trying to stop him. Ladies and gentlemen, Walsh announced over the facility's sound system as alarms began blaring. Tonight's entertainment has become even more special. We have an unexpected guest. Former heavyweight champion Mike Tyson has joined us for our grand finale. Spotlights illuminated Tyson as he stood in the arena entrance, suddenly understanding that his infiltration had been anticipated and turned into part of the evening's entertainment. The trap had been set long before he'd entered the building. Mr. Tyson has come to rescue these children, Walsh continued with mock concern. But first, he'll have to prove he deserves them more than we do. Security gates slammed shut throughout the facility, trapping Tyson inside with the fighters, spectators, and criminals while sirens wailed in the distance announcing the federal assault that was coming too late. The facility's main arena erupted in chaos as spectators realized they were trapped in a building surrounded by federal agents. But Walsh saw opportunity in the crisis rather than disaster. His voice boomed over the sound system with sadistic satisfaction. "This is perfect, Mike. A real champion versus our best fighter, live and unscripted. Winner takes all, including the children." Walsh forced the confrontation by threatening Ashley and the other young fighters unless Tyson agreed to face their current champion in single combat. Marcus, the Machine Johnson, the massive former college football player, stepped into the arena looking like a conditioned killer with dead eyes and scarred fists. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.